welcome to the first debate for the 2nd Congressional seat. To my right, welcome Representative Mike Simpson. To my left, welcome his challenger, Idaho Falls attorney Bryan Smith. For weeks, we've been taking questions from Times News readers, and I'm going to use those questions to steer the debate tonight. We won't be taking any questions from the audience tonight. Bryan Smith won the coin toss, and he chose to let Mike Simpson start with his introductory remarks. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Autumn. First, let me thank Times News and for hosting this debate, and Autumn for moderating it. I'm running for re-election because of the things I've been able to accomplish for the people of Idaho. I've been a conservative voice in Washington, D.C., and sought conservative solutions for the problems that we face. You know, we oftentimes ask ourselves in Washington, in fact, too often, when an issue comes up, we say, do Democrats or Republicans win or lose with this given issue? We need to stop that. And we need to start asking ourselves, do the American people win or lose? That's really what counts. Let me tell you, with that in mind, a few of the things that I've been fighting against and a few of the things I've been fighting for in my career in Washington, D.C. Some of the things I've been fighting against. If you remember when Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid rammed through Obamacare. I voted against it. I voted against it every time I've had the opportunity. I voted against it over 50 times to repeal or defund Obamacare. Those are the facts. They're indisputable. When they rammed through the stimulus bill, nearly $1 trillion of spending, I sat on the committee. I voted against it in committee, and I voted against it on the floor. Those are the facts. They're indisputable. Let me tell you about some of the things I've been fighting for. I've been fighting to cut federal spending. I've been fighting to cut federal spending. I sit on the Appropriations Committee that has reduced federal spending 4 times, 4 years in a row since the end of World War II. It's the first time that's happened. We have cut billions out of discretionary spending. And that's what I've been fighting to do, is to balance our budget. I've been a supporter of the Ryan budget. I've been a supporter of a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and many other things that I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about tonight during this debate.
All right, Bryan, it's your turn.
I want to thank Autumn and the Times News for hosting the debate this evening. I also want to thank Congressman Simpson for being here. You know, 5 years ago, it would have been inconceivable to me that I would be sitting here tonight a candidate for United States Congress. You see, I do love my job, and I love spending time with my family, and I just love living in Southeast Idaho. And I love these things much more than the idea of spending 4 days a week back in Washington, D.C. But if you feel like me, you just know in your heart that our country has seriously gotten off on the wrong track. We've seen the debt increase by over $5.3 trillion, years of unemployment over 7%, and too many hardworking families struggling to live their American dream. Now, sadly, career politicians in Washington like Congressman Simpson have become part of the problem after many years in government. His support for bigger spending and higher taxes and larger government has made Washington prosper while middle America suffers. I know we can do better. I was born in Boise, and I grew up right here in Idaho. My father was a baker, and my mother a stay-at-home mom. My parents instilled in me the values of courage, hard work, savings, and faith, and I was the first one in our family to go to school. I attended Brigham Young University and then went on to law school, and I can assure you that my father was proud the day a baker's boy from Boise got his law degree in 1989 with honors. I've been married to my wife, Sharon, for 30 years, and we have 5 wonderful children together, and they are the reason that I sit here today. You see, I've had a chance to live the American dream, and I'm worried that many of our children won't have that same opportunity. I am a true conservative who is not afraid to stand up for us. That is why I'm running, and that is why I'm asking for your support.
Let's start with something we all care about, guns. Both of you are vocal supporters of the Second Amendment, and both of you have been endorsed by gun lobbies. Here's a question from a Times News reader, David in Burley. In what cases do you support background checks before gun purchase, and are there cases you support gun registration? And a more personal note, how has your position changed over the years?
Well, thank you for that question. I have been a big supporter of the Second Amendment. In fact, in Idaho Falls, when the Heller decision came out and also the Otis McDonald decision, the local radio people called me up and asked me to appear on radio because they knew that I would read those cases and that I was familiar with the rules, and they know of my love for the Second Amendment. I have my own concealed weapons permit. I've been endorsed by the National Association for Gun Rights. And I am also a life member of the NRA. Now, I haven't always agreed with who they've endorsed. So, for example, in 2004, when they endorsed Harry Reid, I disagreed, as you might well too. I will stand up and be an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment. When it comes to background checks, I oppose background checks or expanding those any further than they are now, certainly. And I also oppose any restrictions or infringements. We have the right to keep and bear arms, and the Second Amendment says that that shall not be infringed, and that means it. Now, what I would tell you is that I have a little different view than Congressman Simpson. You see, in 1999, when he first got into office, in June of 1999, one of the first votes he cast in relation to the Second Amendment was to expand mandatory background checks at gun shows. He also voted for mandatory background check or mandatory trigger locks with pistol sales. So he voted not only to expand background checks at gun shows, but he voted for mandatory trigger locks with pistol sales. To me, that is inconsistent with the Second Amendment, and I would not have done that. I consider myself an ardent supporter, and frankly, I feel that that vote was just too liberal.
All right, thanks, Brian. You want me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. I think I pretty much got it. You know, I've been endorsed by the NRA, which is the gold standard on the Second Amendment. As they said during their endorsement, during my career in Washington, 60 out of 60 times that they have scored votes, they have supported me, that I have been right, I have been on their side. Anybody that tries to suggest that I'm not an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment doesn't know what they're talking about, frankly. The vote that Brian mentions, they brought up during the endorsement. One of his friends was in the audience and brought that up. And to tell you the truth, I couldn't remember the vote. So I went back and looked. And I found it interesting that all of the Democrats, except 10, voted against that amendment. Most of the Republicans voted in favor of it. Republicans like Tom DeLay, Dick Armey, Bob Barr, who was on the National Rifle Association's board of directors, Jim DeMint, and others, ardent supporters of the Second Amendment. What you have to look at is what we were trying to do. We were trying to defeat a proposal from Lautenberg that would have required like a 3-day waiting period. This required instant background checks at gun shows, instant background checks at gun shows. They don't have instant background checks at gun shows. That was what we found out. This amendment went down, and we were ultimately able to defeat the Lautenberg Amendment. But anybody that suggests or even hints that I'm not an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment, A, just doesn't know me or just isn't telling the truth.
Mike, and then you have your rebuttal, so I'm going to ask you too. You both stated how you feel about background checks. And what about gun registration? Is there ever a time you would support mandatory gun registration?
Absolutely not.
All right, you have a minute.
Okay. Well, Congressman Simpson, I'm not actually attacking him personally. I'm just saying if you look at what he voted for in 1999, there is no dispute that he voted for expanded background checks. Now, he says that there were other people back in Washington who voted like he did. But Idaho's very own Helen Chenoweth, a well-known conservative from the 1st Congressional District, she voted against that amendment, or against that bill. And so when it comes to Idaho values, and when it comes to how we see things in Idaho, she saw that differently. Now, Congressman Simpson also had his constituents inundate his office, all 4 offices in the state of Idaho. So they didn't see it as something that was insignificant, and I don't see it as something that's insignificant because I don't see protecting our Second Amendment rights as something that's insignificant.
Thank you both. All right, let's move on to public lands.
Okay.
This goes to Mike first. We all watched Cliven Bundy and his supporters as they had an armed confrontation in Nevada. The issue raised a lot of emotions and it raised a lot of questions. And this question comes from Linda in Shoshone. We're talking about BLM land. Right now, a rancher pays $1.35 a month per cow-calf pair. How would you vote if you were asked to raise the rate? And in what other ways do you think we need to re-examine grazing on public land?
Well, you know, first let me say that I am glad that the confrontation down in Nevada didn't end up in a Ruby Ridge or Waco sort of situation, that cooler heads prevailed in the end. But it brought, if you take Bundy out of the picture and start looking at management of public lands, that's really what the issue is all about. And there have been proposals year after year to increase grazing fees across the state, across the federal government on BLM lands. I've opposed those. I've been the chairman of the Interior Committee, and I've opposed increasing the grazing fees for Idaho's ranchers and farmers, or ranchers and farmers anywhere else in this country. They pay $1.35. It's been that way for some time, but I will tell you there are extra costs that come with grazing on public lands. So when you compare the price of grazing on public lands with that on private lands and other things, raising them is not the right thing to do, particularly in these economic times. So we could do a better job of managing our grazing with the BLM. This kind of brought out the whole management issue, which is really fundamental to that situation that went on down there. Issues with the desert tortoise. When you get into Idaho, you have issues with slick-spotted peppergrass and other ESA issues that make it much more expensive for a rancher to ranch on public lands. So I'm not supportive of raising the grazing fees, and I've opposed it as the chairman of the committee that would have to do it.
So do you believe that what they're paying now covers the cost of the management?
I think it does cover the cost of what the BLM has to do to manage it. But raising it in these economic times when ranchers are having a very tough time with making a profits, raising them would be the wrong thing to do.
All right, thank you. Brian, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I know it.
All right.
Well, look, I've got a better idea than raising the rate. We all know the federal government's not good at managing anything. The answer should be we should get our lands back from the federal government and let it be controlled in the state and on the county level. Now, let me tell you, there's a family I met in Idaho called the Shirt family. And they had a whole bunch of sheep, 9,000 head of sheep. And the federal government cut off their sheep allotment. And they'd had sheep in their family for many, many years. They don't even get to pay any kind of allotment because the federal government cut them off, causing us economic problems in the state and destroying this family's business. That's why I've been a supporter of getting our land back. The state of Idaho sits on Fort Knox. We have molybdenum, we have gold, we have silver, we have lead, we have thorium up in Lemhi County. We have all kinds of natural resources, timber and other things. If we could access those, I know the state of Idaho could manage it much better than the federal government. That's why I've advocated to getting those lands back. And then we could be as prosperous as perhaps North Dakota, where you can't even get a job at minimum wage because everything starts out at $15 an hour. Now, compare my feeling about the federal lands, getting them back to the state, and my position with Congressman Simpson. For over 10 long years, he tried to lock up more Idaho land with the Siedra bill that he tried to propose. 10 years. That is inconsistent with getting our lands back from the state, from the federal government. I agree with Idaho's Republican Party. No more federal wilderness.
All right. So, Mike, do you want to address other things he said, but also
Sure.
that idea of taking back
I didn't
federal
hear in his
land?
answer whether he supported increasing the grazing fees or not. He went all around them, but he never really talked about that. You know, what I'm supportive of is the state of Idaho being able to manage more of these lands, and I'm supportive of Governor Otter and being able to transfer those lands to the state of Idaho for management. We manage lands with the Bureau of Land Management in the state of Idaho, and there's no reason they couldn't be managing those lands that are surrounding them. And with the proposal that we've had, stewardship contracting and other things like that, that allows the state of Idaho or a county or an organization to go into an MOU with the Forest Service or other organizations to manage federal forests or BLM land or other things like that, is a more realistic solution of how you're going to get the state managing more of these federal lands. That's just the reality, and I've been working with Governor Otter to do that. You've got to remember, Idahoans live in Idaho because we love our public lands. And what you've got to do is make sure we protect access to those public lands for hunters, for fishermen, for recreationists. That's what's important in the state of Idaho.
Before we move on to the next question, do you want to address the grazing question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't first of all, I don't see increasing that rate at all. There's no question that the federal government can't manage it fairly. So why should anybody pay more just because the federal government can't manage the land properly?
Let's move on. Let's talk about immigration.
Okay?
I got a lot of questions about immigration.
I'll bet you did.
So this isn't just for one reader, this is from a lot of Times News readers. As you know, dairy is a big industry in the Magic Valley. It employs 9,000 people in Idaho, and it's been said that about 70% of those are here illegally. So the problem is there's an H-2A visa for ag workers, but that is for seasonal workers and for positions that are temporary. The problem in the dairy industry is that those jobs are year-round and they're permanent. So the dairy industry asked Congress for three things in immigration reform. And those three things are legalization of the current trained workforce, many of whom came here legally but overstayed their visas. 2, access to a year-round workforce. 3, an effective way to access new workers in the future. And they got all these things with the passage of the Senate immigration reform. And I know it's now before the House. It's in the Judiciary Committee, and they have discussed breaking this up into 4 or 5 different bills. Yeah. So when those bills come to you, would you support those 3 reforms?
Well, let me tell you, let me speak about immigration in general first. It's one of the most difficult issues that we face. It's controversial no matter what you do, but everybody knows that the current immigration system is broken, and we've got to reform the current immigration system. It starts with securing the borders. If you can't do anything, you cannot do anything else in immigration if you don't secure the borders first. So we've got to make sure that we secure the borders, and then we've got to make sure that we go after the drugs and gangs and other people that are here illegally and try and deport them. Then we've got to have a guest worker program that actually works, and that's what the dairy industry was talking about, and I support those provisions that do that. We've got to have a guest worker program that works. The real question comes up, what do you do with all the people that are here illegally? And what the House has been looking at is the possibility of making them legal, giving them a green card and the ability to work here, but not citizenship. We don't want to reward illegal immigration. If they want to become citizens, then they have to apply for citizenship and go to the back of the line. But the reality is, it is a very, very controversial issue. And even people that say, well, let's just deport everybody that's here illegally, do you really think that's going to happen? Probably not. It would devastate our economy. So we've got to sit down and work this out, and the House has taken the position that a comprehensive bill is almost impossible to pass, and almost anything we do is going to be seen as amnesty to some people. But it's a problem that we've got to solve. Everybody realizes that, and we'll continue to work on it. I can tell you that the Speaker knows this is an issue we've got to solve.
I just want to be clear. So you would be willing, the workers that are here, to help them stay legally? And is that just for the dairy industry, or is that for all industries?
Well, if they come here and they've got a year-round job, and someone is sponsoring them, then they ought to be able to stay for that year-round job. You've got a problem if all you have is a seasonal permit and you have to keep coming and going back and forth. That disrupts industry and it hurts our economy. So creating a immigration program where they can come and stay and work and be here legally, instead of and pay taxes, pay their fines if they're here currently illegally, pay their fines, pay taxes, learn English, a few things like that, then I think you could do something like that. But it is going to be a very difficult issue to solve. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. It's going to be tough.
You want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I know the question. Let me also address this issue generally initially. What we're looking at in the United States is something that the Constitution requires the federal government to do. That's one of the few things the federal government is supposed to do, is immigration. And we need to distinguish between legal and illegal immigration. We want legal immigration. We want people to come from all over the world, like Nathan Handwerker did in 1917 when he showed up in New York. All he had was the clothes on his back, a couple of suitcases, and a wife who had a really good recipe for hot dogs. And he started selling hot dogs, and people bought his hot dogs. Now, he probably didn't have to comply with a bunch of FDA permits, et cetera, to try to sell them. But he had these hot dogs, and he was successful at them. And now, almost 100 years later, you can go to the grocery store and buy Nathan's famous hot dogs. That's what we want to encourage. What we're talking about with immigration that becomes difficult is the illegal immigration problem. And I describe it as this, and what we need to do I describe as this. If you were to walk in your bathroom and see somebody had turned the water on in the tub and the water was overflowing, there's not a person in this room that would go grab the mop bucket and start mopping it up before you shut the water off. But when it comes to illegal immigration, we're trying to address all the concerns before we seal the borders. We need to seal our borders before we start addressing any of the other concerns, or it'd be the same as mopping up water off the floor without shutting the water off. Now, when it comes to Congressman Simpson, he said that we shouldn't reward illegal immigration. I agree. There should be no amnesty for individuals who come here illegally. The problem is that in 2002, Congressman Simpson did in fact vote to give amnesty to those people who come here illegally. I disagree with that. I wouldn't do that. We shouldn't reward people who break the law with giving them amnesty.
Mike, I'm going to ask one quick follow-up question.
Okay.
I have a quick question. So you talk a lot about smaller government, and you just talked about the first step to immigration is to close the border. Yes. Would you support increasing funding to the Border Patrol?
Yeah, here's my point. Like I mentioned, immigration is one of the well-defined and limited responsibilities of the federal government. Now, I'm certain if we can find $100,000 to send President Obama off on a vacation, we can certainly find the money in our budget for something that the federal government is supposed to do. Now, how exactly we secure that? We could use technology, we could use computers, we could use infrared technology. There's several things we can do, but this is something that we have to do and something that is constitutionally required. And the federal government has constitutional authority to do it, and they need to do it.
The virtual fence you just talked about hasn't worked very well, frankly. We've been doing that for quite some time, and it hasn't worked at all. What you're going to have is more people on the border. I'm glad to see you finally agree with me on something, that we've got to secure the border first. That's what I said from the beginning. And where you get this vote that I voted for amnesty is bizarre, frankly. I don't know what vote that was or where it came, but after having 10,000 votes, I'm sure you can misrepresent a lot of my votes like you have in your advertisements and commercials, so that's okay with me.
The new Farm Bill was passed earlier this year, after 3 years of wrangling and almost 2 years after the last one expired. From the outside, it looks like a cultural tug of war. I'm going to read you a quote, and this is important to the questions that follow. So this quote came from Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack. He said this in 2012. He said, "Why is it we don't have a farm bill? It isn't just the differences of policy, it's the fact that rural America with a shrinking population is becoming less and less relevant to the politics of this country." So with that in mind, we have this question from Eric in Buell. There's talk that the Farm Bill should be broken apart so food stamps and farm subsidies could be debated separately. What do you think of that idea, and would it do more to erode farmers' political influence among urban legislators?
Okay, before I answer that, which I will do, I want to respond to Congressman Simpson, who said that I must have misrepresented his record on the amnesty vote. If you look at roll call vote number 53 in the year 2002, you will see, in fact, that Congressman Simpson did vote in favor of giving amnesty to those who come here illegally. Now, to get to your question about the Farm Bill, I have several clients who are farmers and ranchers, and the fact is that farming and ranching makes up what I would say the backbone of Idaho's economy. It provides more jobs and more economic activity than anything else in our state. And I suggest that we do all we can do to strengthen the backbone of our economy with farming and ranching. And so I have been a big supporter of farmers and ranchers. I've represented them over the years, and I understand how good they are. They are the best in the world. And in my view, the best way to help our farmers and ranchers is to let them compete selling their goods anywhere in the United States and around the world. They can compete in a free market system, and they can do better than they are now. They can compete better than anybody in the world, and I have complete confidence in them. Now, when it comes to the Farm Bill itself, the Farm Bill that we got was actually 80% food stamps. That Farm Bill was really 80% used to fund Obama's welfare economy. And so clearly we should have broken that bill up. We should have taken out the welfare portions of that bill and broken it up. But in my view, what we need to do to help strengthen our farmers and ranchers is to get, for example, the EPA out of their life, let the farmers and ranchers be able to grow their crops without dust control measures or how much you can have chemicals in the water. Those are the things we need to do to get the EPA out of the farmer's life. That is the best way to help the farmers be more productive.
Should it be broken up? Brian's right. 80% of that bill was the food stamp program. And it's been that way for quite some time. I wondered when I first came to Congress, why don't we put that in the welfare department and put it in the welfare bill rather than in the ag bill? And what I found out is the reality is you won't pass an ag bill unless you tie those two together, because fewer and fewer people are coming from rural America. I've got people in Washington, D.C. who think that eggs come in a carton. They don't know they come from chickens, and milk comes in a carton. Doesn't know it comes from a cow. And I'm not joking. So they have no interest in the Farm Bill. They have no stake in the Farm Bill. And so what they did years ago is tie the food stamp programs to the Farm Bill to get both rural and urban people together on the same bill. If you break it apart, I'm afraid, and I've thought about it, whether it's a good idea or not, I'm afraid you'll have much more difficult time passing a Farm Bill. It's nice to talk about free markets and agriculture and free markets. I agree with you fully. Most agricultural groups will tell you that they would like to compete in a free market. You show me a free market, though, in agriculture, one doesn't exist. Everybody says the sugar program is the most wasteful program there ever. I could tell you stories about what other countries do for the sugar program, and if we got rid of the sugar program, what it would do to the beet growers in this community and in this state. it would be devastating, because you cannot compete against a government-subsidized program. And that's what happens throughout agriculture. But almost every agricultural group will tell you, you give me a free market and I'm willing to compete in it. Now show me the free market. I'm willing to work with them.
Well, the reason they link these up, the Farm Bill and the welfare report, 80% of the farm bills for Obama's welfare economy, is the same reason they call Obamacare the Affordable Care Act. They're not telling us the truth. The truth is when you hear about the Farm Bill, you think, oh, it helps farmers. It's not until you do your homework and you find out 80% of the money goes to welfare for Obama's economy. When Congressman Simpson said he's afraid that if you don't link them together, you can't get it done, we need someone who will stand up for conservative principles in Washington and not be afraid. We need to separate these bills and call it for what it is. It's the Obama Welfare Economy Bill. Let's see if that would pass. It probably wouldn't. We need to separate them apart, and we need to stand firm on conservative principles in Washington, and splitting that bill up would be a very good place to start.
All right, back on track. Mike?
Okay.
Let's talk about the Farm Bill a few more minutes, 5 more minutes exactly. Okay. In the Farm Bill, what concessions do you think farmers should have made, and what concessions should the left have made?
Well, I can tell you that the farmers made a lot of concessions in this bill. We saved $30 billion out of the existing programs when we wrote this Farm Bill. And the Farm Bill is a 5-year program. So we saved $30 billion out of it over these years. $8 billion of it was from the food stamp program. We actually passed provisions that would have, in our original Farm Bill, that would have cut $20 billion out of the food stamp program. But guess what? We couldn't get it passed because people like Bryan that are in Congress said, no, we need to split these bills up. So instead of $20 billion in savings, we split them up. We passed them both, sent them over to the Senate, they put them back together, and we got $8 billion in savings. Sometimes when they demand certain things, you end up going in the wrong direction. And that's what happened with this. Instead of $20 billion in savings in food stamps, we got $8 billion in savings in food stamps. I think the farmers made a lot of concessions. We did away with direct payments to farmers, and what we went to, and what most farmers tell me, is what they needed is a crop insurance program that actually works. And so we remodeled and strengthened the crop insurance program and got away from the direct payment to farmers and other things like that. We, in the dairy portion of it, I and Colin Peterson from Minnesota had worked on a Dairy Security Act. We didn't get everything that we wanted in the Dairy Security Act, but we moved it in the right direction, and we will continue to work on that. So we are changing the farm programs to make sure that they match the times.
I think it's interesting that Congressman Simpson refers to people like me back in Washington. There are some who are not afraid to stand up for conservative values and conservative principles. When it comes to our farmers, they can compete anywhere in the world, but we need to make sure that they don't have problems like the EPA bearing down on them as they try to harvest their crops and plant and run their businesses. In terms of the concessions that our farmers have made, I feel like they've made a tremendous concession in having bureaucrats from Washington enter their businesses and allow the bureaucrats to tell them how to require them to do reporting and to fill out onerous forms. If you take a look at the farm subsidies that are given in the state of Idaho, 67% of those farm subsidies go to the top 10% of the farmers, whereas 80% of the farmers get an annual payment of less than $1,000 for farm subsidies. So for me, the concession that they made is by allowing bureaucrats and centralized planners from Washington to come in and tell them how they can farm, how they can do their dairy business. I believe we need to get the federal government out of our lives and less control, and let people manage their own affairs and let the free market system work for them.
minute.
Oh, I have a minute? I agree we need to get the EPA out of the business. I've been the one doing that. I'm the one that have cut billions out of the EPA budget. I'm the one who received thousands and thousands of emails from EPA employees saying, stop the war on the EPA. And I responded back to them, stop the war on the American people. And that's what's happening. I've been doing the hard work. Talk is cheap. I've actually been doing the hard work of reining in the EPA, and I will tell you one of the things that we're trying to rein in right now, that if we don't get control of it is going to be devastating, and that is the EPA's control under the Clean Water Act of all waters of the United States, because they've taken away the word navigable and said we will control everything. That means every irrigation ditch, every mud puddle, everything else. I'm the one that's going to be able to stop that.
All right, let's move on to another topic.
Okay.
This one goes to Brian. We're going to talk about the NSA. So we all remember how we felt after September 11th. We were angry, we were scared, and frankly, we were willing to give up certain privacies in exchange for security. Simpson voted for the Patriot Act in 2001 and voted yes on reauthorization of the Patriot Act in 2011. Since then, details of the government surveillance program were revealed by Edward Snowden, and people are angry, and the NSA has been the focus of review. So with that in mind, this question is from Dale, a Times newsreader in Twin Falls. Did the Patriot Act go too far? And knowing what you know now, how would you vote?
I want to answer that question, I will, but before I do, let me just make this observation. Sometime before 1976, we didn't even have, or 1969, excuse me, we didn't even have an EPA. I think we should get rid of the EPA. Congressman Simpson's been on record saying, you can't get rid of the EPA. How did we ever exist before 1969 without an EPA? We existed just fine. Let me answer the question for the NSA. I am a person who believes in our Fourth Amendment rights. The federal government is not supposed to be snooping or searching our internet or our emails or our cell phones without probable cause. Yet we know from Edward Snowden that that is exactly what they were doing. I don't believe that they should do that. I would also have been against the Patriot Act. Let me tell you what happened last summer. When Mr. Snowden came out with his revelations, one of those congressmen called Justin Amash back in Michigan, who feels like I do about an overreaching federal government, he came up with an amendment. And the amendment was to stop the federal government from spying and snooping on our emails and our internet and our cell phone calls unless the person was under investigation or reasonable suspicion of having committed a crime. He put an amendment to put a hold on that, to make sure it couldn't happen. I came out and said, we need to do that because what they're doing is inconsistent with the Fourth Amendment. Congressman Simpson, he voted against Justin Amash's amendment to allow that to continue even without probable cause, even without somebody being under investigation. And it was about 3 or 4 months later, a federal judge came out and found with me and said that it was unconstitutional. We didn't have to vote for it before we could see something was unconstitutional. So I'm against that provision of the EPA or the NSA that allows that to happen.
I, too, am against the federal government searching your emails, listening to your phone records, or anything else. We're at a time where we're trying to balance the privacy rights of the American people with the security needs of this country. Most of the laws that deal with security were written when we had landlines. There weren't cell phones, there weren't computers, there weren't any of those things, and we have to update our laws to match the times and the technology that exist if we're going to keep the American people safe. Does that mean we should be snooping? No, we should absolutely not be snooping. When the Amash Amendment came down, unfortunately, it was one of those reactionary sort of things after Snowden's revelations came out that just threw out the baby with the bathwater. We wanted to take a more measured approach to see what we can do and how we can rein in the NSA. We have an intelligence committee, and that intelligence committee today is rewriting the authorizations for what the NSA and other organizations can do. And I'm waiting for that report to come out and for their recommendations. But I don't think you just throw out the baby with the bathwater. I could tell you what some of the things that have happened in the NSA and what the NSA has done to solve some of them and what this program was all about. One of them was there was a known terrorist in Yemen. And because of the megadata collections that they'd had, and all they're doing is collecting phone calls, not content or anything else, the length of the phone call, the date, and the number that it's calling. This guy called a number in Los Angeles. And then the Los Angeles number called a number in New York. Through this, they found out and tracked, because it was of interest to them, who belonged to those numbers, and they called the FBI in New York and said, we're watching this guy, and they said, that's pretty interesting because we're watching him too. They stopped the New York Times Square terrorist attack.
Thank you. All right, you have a minute.
I'll wait till we're done. Benjamin Franklin said that if we trade our freedom for security, we will end up with neither. Congressman Simpson said we have to balance privacy, essentially against the Fourth Amendment. He said the laws dealing with security are outdated and antiquated. Well, I'll tell you what's not outdated and antiquated. It's the Fourth Amendment that we got in about 1789. That is not antiquated and outdated. The law that has allowed the federal government to snoop on our emails and our privacy in violation of the Fourth Amendment is, to me, something that is contrary to who we are as Americans. And if I'd have had a chance to vote on that Amash Amendment, I definitely would have voted for it. We not only would have reined in the federal government from violating the Fourth Amendment, but we also could have saved millions, if not perhaps billions of dollars in unnecessary NSA funding while they snoop and spy on us.
All right, Mike, let's talk about foreign policy.
Okay.
You can correct me. I think that I understand where you were coming from on these votes or when you took a stand. But
okay.
It appears to me that you supported military action in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, but not in Libya or Syria. Is that accurate?
Pretty close, yep.
Okay. So how do you decide? What criteria do you use to decide when the U.S. should intervene?
Whether it's in the national interests of the United States. Basically, that's it. And if you look at the intelligence reports that we were receiving before we went into Iraq, most of them have been said that they have been proven to be false, a lot of them anyway, since that time. But they were not just the United States intelligence. It was the United States, France, Germany, Italy, England, even China, and Russia's intelligence. We're all saying the same thing, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and the ability to use them. When that becomes an issue, then I think you have to do something about it if it is in your national interest. And that's why overwhelming majority of us voted to give President Bush the authority to use force in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. I don't think our national interests were at risk in Libya. And in fact, Libya had already turned over all of their nuclear material and nuclear weapons to the United States earlier. So I don't think that was in our best interest and in our national interest, and I don't see Syria being in our national interest, even though that there's a genocide that's going on there by President Assad of Syria. But before I run out of time on this, let me just say, what I'm saying, Brian, is not that the Fourth Amendment is out of date. or is unimportant. What I'm saying is we're trying to match the privacy of the American citizens and the Fourth Amendment to the technology that exists today. Because you can do things with technology today that you could never do before. I actually had a woman call me and tell me that she had bought a smart TV, and she was sitting at home in her smart TV, she was yarning, and her TV wasn't even on. And her son called her and said, "Hey Mom, turn on your TV, I can watch you. I'm seeing you right now sitting in the living room. Turn it on so that you can see us." Her TV wasn't even on. Technology today is something we have to deal with.
All right, back to intervention. Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I understand it. Look, the United States of America has a special role in the world because we are the beacon of freedom and hope around the world. People look to us for guidance in all that we do. We set an example. But what we can't be, obviously, is the world's police force. Now, the Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. Since World War II, I can't remember a time that Congress exercised that power, but we've been in plenty of wars. And perhaps one of the reasons that's happened is that we've been a little misguided. We feel that if something is in our national interest, that we can go to war. For me, there has to be more than that. Has to be in our national interest, and we as a country have to have some sort of imminent threat of harm directed towards us. Now, in the event we do move troops, it is up to Congress to declare a declaration of war before we can actually wage war in foreign countries. For me, we have threats today. The Russians now are creating some sort of hostilities on the border with Ukraine. We need to monitor situations like those, and we can impose monetary sanctions. Unfortunately, we have a president today who lacks the moral authority around the world. When he speaks, people just don't listen, especially people like Mr. Putin. We also have threats in Iran. We certainly cannot let Iran get a nuclear weapon. They want to destroy us. And we also need to have good, strong ties with our ally, Israel and Iran. And finally, we have other threats, people like countries like North Korea. We need to watch those and monitor those, but we need to be very careful for waging war or getting involved in wars just because somebody can say it's in our national interest.
I agree with you in part, but you got to remember that in Iraq and Afghanistan, the president asked for and received authority from Congress. He didn't just do this. I will tell you that for 200 years, and I've been saying this for a number of years, for 200 years, Congress has been handing its authority to the administrative branch of government, and we've got to stop. Congress has to stand up and take back that authority. Whether it's the War Powers Act or other things, Congress needs to regain that authority. But in Afghanistan and Iraq, the president asked for and requested authority, and Congress gave it. He didn't ask for it in Libya, and he didn't ask for it in Syria. That's the difference.
All right, we're getting close to an hour. I want to go ahead and just ask one more question from our readers because a lot of people asked a similar question. This one came from John in Twin Falls. Was the government shutdown last year good for the Republican Party?
The question is, was the government shutdown good for the Republican Party? You know, I'm not so concerned as much about the Republican Party as I am the United States of America and the state of Idaho. What I can tell you is this: something that can't go on forever won't. And we have spent ourselves into a big, deep hole. We borrow over about 40% of every dollar we spend. We're printing between $65 and $85 billion a month. And we have over $17 trillion in debt. Now, unfortunately, Congressman Simpson's been part of the problem. When he went into office, the debt was $5.3 trillion. Today, it's over $17 trillion. He's voted for programs like the Cash for Clunker program, funding it with $2 billion. He also voted for the $700 billion bank bailout. He was one of only 3 Republicans who voted in favor of funding ACORN with tax dollars. He also voted, he was one of 10 Republicans who voted to spend $23 million for a park in Nancy Pelosi's district. He's been an ardent supporter of earmarks, which are in fact the gateway drug to excessive spending. If we take a look at his record, he's been part of the problem as opposed to part of the solution. And he's also even voted to raise taxes on numerous occasions. But when it comes to the raising the debt ceiling last October, Congressman Simpson voted for it. Interestingly, Senators Risch and Senator Crapo and Congressman Labrador all voted against it. I would be curious to know what Congressman Simpson knew that those other 3 good conservatives didn't know. What I know is this: I will stand up against Obama. If he wants to raise the debt ceiling, we will get substantial cuts in spending, or I simply won't vote for it. That is a big difference between me and Congressman Simpson.
Well, there you go again, Brian. As I said earlier, you are misrepresenting and actually lying about the things that I voted for. I didn't vote for a park in Nancy Pelosi's district. Do you know that? There was no park in Nancy Pelosi's district. You know what that was? It was the Presidio Trust. It was the Presidio Army base, and we transferred it to the public sector, as we should. It had been bracked, and we transferred it to the public sector. I didn't vote against ACORN. I voted 28 times the year before to defund ACORN, and as a result of my votes, ACORN is not there anymore. Now, the next year, a member brought an amendment that had ACORN listed, several ACORN organizations, but they also had 50-some-odd organizations listed that wouldn't qualify for federal funding. Now, you're an attorney. You know that you can't just pick someone out and say you don't qualify for federal funding because I don't like the color of your hair or whatever. And when asked, the sponsor of the amendment, what did these groups do that you find so offensive that they shouldn't receive funding? He didn't know. He said, I don't know. He said, where did you get these groups? He said, oh, out of newspapers. And you expect me to vote for a bill of attainder that's unconstitutional for these organizations? If you're going to expect me to put a black letter on somebody's forehead, you better be able to tell me why. The ACORN groups that were listed in there, they were already gone and defunded because of the votes I had taken the year before. Cash for clunkers, I voted against cash for clunkers. Higher taxes, do you know taxes are lower today? Taxes are lower today than when I took office, and I've supported the largest tax decrease in American history. That's the reality. That was the 2001, the 2003 tax cuts. So you can go out and misrepresent and lie about my votes all you want to, but I'm going to set the record straight, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. Okay. What was the original question?
Do I have a minute to respond?
You do have a minute to respond.
Okay.
Do you want to hear the question?
Yeah, no, I know what it is. Let's set the record straight. On that park in Nancy Pelosi's district, 224 Republicans voted against $23 million in spending. Congressman Simpson was one of 10 Republicans who voted to give her that $23 million, and the next day she issued a press release praising Congressman Simpson for his effort. That is not misrepresenting the record. That is a fact. When it comes to ACORN, he was one of only 3. There were over 220 Republicans that saw that issue differently. What is it that they knew that Congressman Simpson didn't know? They figured out what was in the bill.
Ask me.
Yet they voted differently. I would also tell you, when it comes to cash for clunkers, Congressman Simpson's correct. He did vote against it initially. President Obama wanted to have a cash for clunker program to fund his economy, and Congressman Simpson voted against it. The problem is, a week later, after it run out of its first $1 billion, Congressman Simpson voted to allocate another $2 billion to the program, and it came from the Department of Energy because his spokesman said he thought it was a program that would actually work. I disagree.
Okay. All right. Now we have closing remarks. We agreed beforehand. Simpson's going to go first.
Thank you again, Autumn, for hosting this debate. You know, elections are kind of tough. their examination of the record of both the incumbent and the challenger, sometimes the misexamination of them, and some of the things that my opponent has been saying are just not true. I'm proud of my conservative record in Washington, D.C. I've been fighting things like Obamacare. I've been fighting the Obama administration on its overreach of rules and regulations and executive orders. I'm proud of the record, the conservative record that I've established. I'm proud of the people that are supporting me. I'm proud that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, the president and vice presidential candidate of the Republican Party, are supporting me. I'm proud that Senator Crapo and Senator Risch, the most conservative senator in the United States Senate, are supporting me. I'm proud that Governor Butch Otter is the chairman of my re-election campaign. These are conservative people. I'm proud of the conservative organizations that support me, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Rifle Association, and virtually every commodity group in Idaho, whether it's the sugar beet growers, the potato growers, the wheat growers, the cattlemen, the dairy industry. I'm proud of my voting record. 100% voting record with the NFIB, 100% voting record with the National Right to Life. That's not almost all the time. That's every single time. 92% voting record with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, an A+ rating from the NRA. I'm proud of that voting record. And I will tell you that if it comes down to trying to puff up my voting record with some interest group in Washington, D.C., or standing by Idaho's ranchers and farmers, I will stand by Idaho's ranchers and farmers every single time. That's my commitment. It's been my greatest honor to represent you in the United States Congress. I would ask for your vote on May 20th. Thank you.
I want to thank Congressman Simpson again for being here today, and I want to thank Autumn and the Times News for hosting the debate. You know, as I travel across Idaho's vast 2nd Congressional District, people are just tired of business as usual. They want someone who will stand up and fight for the conservative values they have taught their children and grandchildren. Many people in the state feel like they've had a chance to live the American dream, and they worry that their children and their grandchildren simply won't have that same opportunity. This is why you deserve a congressman who's not afraid to stand up for conservative principles in Washington, one who will fight for substantial spending cuts rather than let our nation's debt grow to infinity, one whose immigration policy begins with first securing our borders, and one who will fight to get our lands back from the federal government rather than one who spent 10 long years trying to lock up more Idaho land and throw away the key. Now, the solutions to our problems are not easy. And fixing the mess of the last 30 years, that's not going to happen overnight. But when you dig yourself into a hole, I know the first thing you do is stop digging. We have dug ourselves into a deep financial hole. So the first thing we need to do is stop spending. We can get this economy going again, but that does mean cutting spending in a real way, fixing our broken tax system, and reducing the regulations that just hurt small businesses. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, 5 years ago, I could not have imagined that I would be running for Congress. But I also could not have imagined how bad things have gotten with our country. I am not a politician. I haven't been in Washington as part of the problem for 16 years. I was born right here in Idaho. I grew up in Idaho, and I know we can do better. I am a true conservative who is not afraid to stand up for us. That is why I'm running. And Twin Falls County, that is why I'm asking for your support. Thank you so much.
I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank these two men for being willing to sit in front of us and let us stare at them and listen to their every word. Don't forget to vote on May 20th. Thank you to KMBT. Thanks for being here.